Hi everyone, this is the Espresso Series in conversation with Dr. Gail Bradbrook. Thank you so much for tuning in. In this interview, we cover a wide range of topics with Gail, all from feminism within activism to her opinion on Kier Starmer and HS2. Keep watching for the interview, and thank you so much for tuning in. All our other links to our other podcasts that we've done and our other interviews will be in the down bar, and you can go and listen to us on all major streaming platforms, including Spotify and iTunes. Our Facebook and Instagram are also down there. So with no further ado, Dr. Gail Bradbrook. Hi everyone, so welcome back to the Espresso Series with your host Grace and Honor, and we are joined so excitingly by Dr. Gail Bradbrook this week. Hi, Doctor.
Hi, just don't call me Gail, thank you.
It's so exciting to have you here, and thank you so much for joining us this week. So obviously we wanted to talk a little bit about you for those of our listeners who haven't been a part of Extinction Rebellion and haven't heard of you or haven't heard of the work that you've been doing. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to form Extinction Rebellion?
It's always hard to know how far to go back, but I've always been interested in social change since I was 9, I would say, and I was thinking about animals and cruelty to animals and animal rights, and I was part of the Green Party when I was 14 in my hometown, as a Green Party was just getting off the ground then, I think, around that time, or at least some version of it. But I guess in 2010, I was sort of really interested in tax justice, in tax evasion and avoidance, and I was thinking a mass tax disobedience was a really important thing to do, and I was looking for people to do it with. And it's really hard to find people to do civil disobedience with, it turns out. It took many years. In 2016, I met Roger Hallam, and with a wider group, we set up a group called Rising Up. We tested some tactics. We learned some things around social movements and how to get them going. We did some training, as in we had training. We read books. Roger was doing a PhD at the time. We did some actions and that sort of thing. And then eventually we said, right, let's try and start a rebellion, which sounds a bit weird, but that's how it happened. And I often say we're sitting in this room that I'm sitting in right now, where we said, yeah, we're ready to have a go at doing this thing. And we launched it in.
You've created this amazing global movement from just your room to the world.
There's a woman who coaches me called Miki Kashtan, Miki Kashtan. She's a fantastic woman, and one of the things she said was that social movements aren't created; they're invited into being. And I really think that's what actually happened. We did have some tools and techniques, and we did work really hard, so to honour our efforts and intentions. However, in 2018, it was also the case, Professor Bendel's deep adaptation paper had come out, the IPCC report was out, the UN Secretary General was making statements, Fridays for the Future with Greta was getting off the ground. There's a lot, there was some specific scientific papers that got press coverage. So, I think we had the zeitgeist, there was the moment. It was something that wanted to happen, and we just created the conditions for it, I think.
And that, it's amazing. We're all in awe of what Extinction Rebellion has done. Whatever you could say about Extinction Rebellion, because obviously there are people who oppose it and people who are for it. It's really, it's a movement that will be remembered by history. And as two history students, it's fascinating to watch that unfold. Grace has got the first question for this week. Grace, over to you.
Hi, so the first question was going to be about pollution in the pandemic, because it's something that I think has been on all of our minds and that people have been asking XR spokespeople about. So the pandemic has brought about a monumental reduction in pollution. What can be done to maintain this, and how are XR going to help make this happen?
Yeah, it's been phenomenal, hasn't it? So in terms of what XR is doing, they've already been, XR people have been out on the streets painting bike signs onto the road to say, we want this to be a bike lane going forwards. We don't want the cars back on this street. We're appreciating the reduction in pollution. And I think air pollution, it was actually a campaign that Rising Up did before it was Extinction Rebellion was on. It was called Stop Killing London, as a campaign that Roger led. So it's been very much on our mind. The front line are, young people, in particular children who've got asthmatic conditions, are really susceptible to air pollution, and that we would let that happen to our children. The number of deaths annual in the UK, I think, is of order 10,000. A significant issue. I think what the pandemic has shown us is that the impossible can happen. Molly Scott Cato, who's a professor of green economics, once said that the problem is that the economy is like this aeroplane that's soaring through the sky, and it's like we need to turn it into a helicopter mid-flight. And you're like, how do we do that? And is that the best analogy for green politics? But whatever. And actually what's happened is that it's landed. It's had to land. I mean, not entirely, by a long way. We know that 50% of emissions come from 10% of the population, and those emissions have dropped drastically because we're not allowed to travel so much, and we're at home. And it shows you that it's possible. So XR is going to do its best. We've got this campaign called No Going Back, to say that we can't carry on as we were before.
And what do you think institutions and governments could be doing? If you had any specific or more general solutions, how do you think that institutions and governments could carry on after this?
Well, it's what they're doing right now as well. They shouldn't be bailing out industries that are high carbon. They should be using this vast amount of money that they've magicked out of thin air. Yeah. I mean, they were famous for saying there is no magic money tree. And as my colleague Sarah said, they found the magic money forest, you know, it's like not just a tree, because governments aren't like households. They can create money, and it comes with an impact with money creation, but they can do it. So it really matters what they spend that money on right now. Some of the companies that are being bailed out have been eating their own profits rather than setting aside reserves on their balance sheet. So that would be the equivalent of having savings. They've been paying themselves vast dividends and bonuses and all the rest of it. They shouldn't be bailed out either. The companies that are making use of tax havens in a really big way shouldn't be getting bailed out, because they're avoiding giving the public purse money, and now they want help from the public purse. What the government should do most of all, though, is to notice that there aren't safety nets in the society that we live in. They're rapidly trying to create this safety net, but it's got huge holes in it that people are dropping through. Yeah. And this isn't one crisis. We knew that pandemics were going to come. It was a semi-guaranteed situation. Yeah. What's on the table next is the failure of antibiotics. Yeah. And that's a tipping point. That's not a curve. That's not like a virus comes, we get the vaccine and we're all okay again, or we get immunity or whatever. Antibiotics stopping working is huge, and it relates to the same issues of biodiversity loss and how we treat animals in industrial farming. And we have to stop. So, yeah. And the main thing that we want them to do, the government, is to have a genuine citizens' assembly that is legally binding to look at the issues and to come up with solutions. They've got too much vested interest to do that properly.
Completely. Well, thank you very much. That's a very interesting insight, and one that I think many young people and people in general can agree that this needs to happen, and our government needs to be held accountable, and they need to be held accountable for, bailing out, companies that think that they can get away with these sort of things and exploit the proletariat for their own means. We're just going to move on.
Well, I mean, what I would say though is that it's a systemic issue. Like, those companies are full of really good people, human beings who care, who've got children, who care about the future, and the system wrongly incentivizes people. Okay. So you have to change the rules of the system. I mean, obviously some people are more leaning in towards greed and helping themselves, and that's not cool. But again, that can be seen through the lens of trauma and a system that allows that to happen. And more, what I would say is the onus is on us to build a different world, rather than to go, oh, it's those bad people over there. Because whenever you do that, you've given your power away. Okay. And I especially think for young people to get organised, like, you should be mad as badgers, whatever the phrase is, sorry, because the system already meant that it was really difficult to get a house, sorry, I've got my children in the house, get a house.
We have slamming dogs.
Yeah. You're being left with debts that that people older than you didn't have from trying to simply get an education. You're being left with the debt of the country. You're being left with the debt of the need to draw down carbon out of the atmosphere. It's outrageous. And like, how are you going to get somewhere to live? How are you going to like survive? You're being forced into this sausage factory of a machinery that's killing life on Earth. And what's in the way of stopping that? And it's usually about togetherness. It's usually the place where togetherness breaks down, and that's where you can put your attention. So we can all say like what the government needs to do or whatever, but they're fucked, the government and the businesses, if people, and especially if young people who've got no skin in the game in many ways, come together and decide we've had enough. You know,
it's about movement now. We've got to move together.
Yeah.
And we're seeing, well, in a different context, we're seeing some of that with the George Floyd murder, and we're seeing people come together. But we'll move on to our next question very quickly. So this one is about Kier Starmer, which I really wanted to ask. Kier Starmer made the following statement during the Labour leadership election after being nominated by Labour's environmental campaign, SERA. "We are living through a climate change. If elected Labour leader, I will make tackling climate change our number one priority and hardwired into everything we do. Another future is possible, but we have to fight for it." And has made similar statements elsewhere. He is the first UK party leader to make these promises. Do you believe in Starmer, and could his administration, if elected, lead to real change to achieve XR's demands of the government in tackling climate change for the foreseeable future?
I mean, I'm doing it social movements because I don't believe in mainstream politics. It's got a lot of power. But I also believe that people should do what they feel moves and motivates them. So I'm not telling anybody what to do. I've variously been a member of the Labour Party and the Green Party over the years. My understanding is Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell fully understood the climate crisis and were doing and putting forwards many things to tackle it. And the system was very clear in making sure there was no chance in hell that they would get elected.
Yeah.
No. There are 5 billionaires that own the vast majority of the print media who will make damn sure. You know, Rupert Murdoch's very clear that he decides who wins the UK's election, right? So I hope Kier Starmer's a good guy. I hope he's by his word. I believe he's at least the Labour Party's still pro HS2.
Yes.
I can't really take them seriously on that basis. I mean, HS2 is an aviation shuttle service, and right now it's ploughing through ancient woodland in the UK. So people you know, there are, the Labour Party often finds itself between many rocks and hard places, where it's trying to work with its base, which includes trade unions, and trade unions are focused on keeping people in employment, and some of that employment can be in old industries that need to go. So it's all in a context of a system that doesn't make sense. So I would caution against spending a lot of time hoping that Starmer's the sort of saviour. We've got to save ourselves. And I was really happy when Jeremy Corbyn got elected, and my colleague and friend who was my boyfriend for a while, Simon B, said, Gail, it's just going to waste energy because everybody's going to focus on that and put loads of time and effort into trying to get him elected, and then eventually won't be, and then we'll be back to square one. So I was like, yeah, you're right, Simon, I've seen that happen. And a huge volume of people worked incredibly hard to try and get the government elected. I mean, what's also happened in the past, you know, when people really challenge the finance system in this country, is actually what's behind it. Who gets to be electable or not. If you're in bed with the finance system in this country, like Tony Blair was, then they'll let you be elected. But unless we transform the finance system in this country, none of the other things going to work properly anyway. And the reason I say that is because 50% of world trade is hidden in tax havens, and Britain organises corruption across the world. The UK and its crown dependencies and its overseas territories, so like the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, Jersey, etc., is the Uber network of tax havens across the world. We organise corruption, we organise the draining of resources from the African continent and elsewhere. And until we stop doing that, we will be inherently, structurally and significantly part of the destruction of the planet.
So until we basically, what I just summarize, or to try and summarize what you're saying, is that mainstream politics, obviously XR has never subscribed to, but it's completely structurally not going to work if we want to change the system and, you know, climate change for the better. To reduce pollution, we have to move away from centralized government to save ourselves, essentially. But how do we dismantle those things?
I mean, I'm not like against governments and states, and that's a bigger conversation anyway. We call for a citizens' assembly because we think that politics has been captured to vested interests. You could call it a corporatocracy or a plutocracy rather than a democracy if you look at it in great detail. In fact, I made a little video once as part of Rising Up. It's kind of embarrassing. It involved faking orgasms. It's called How to Fake a Democracy, 15 Ways to Fake a Democracy.
I want a link to this. Where does this exist?
I know. Yeah. Well, if you look up Rising Up and How to Fake a Democracy, you'll find it. It's a too rapid fire, I think, but it's sort of like about the capture of the media, the lobbying bill, which gagged NGOs, behind the scenes payments through tax havens to politicians. And so there's a whole pile of reasons why democracy is captured. I think within that system that politicians aren't really allowed to thrive, the good ones, and be effective. And you know, I don't want to be so black and white about anything. If people are feeling the call to support the new leader in the Labour Party, I mean, listen to your heart and your yearnings. You know, it's not for me to say, but where I've got to age 48 is that I just don't spend a lot of time thinking. I vote, you know, I do it by postal vote to get it over with, and then I do real politics, which is, I think, getting us on the streets and saying enough.
So XR's 3 government demands, if these were carried out, would this require a lot of system change or not, do you think, based on what you were just saying about?
Well, it's a really good question, because it depends. There's a very crucial line in the 3rd demand that says a citizens' assembly focused on climate and ecological justice. So it doesn't say to tackle, you know, to take carbon out of the atmosphere at some random date. It said climate and ecological. So whatever we do has to have justice at the heart of it, both for people and planet, for nature. The Citizens Assembly Working Group believes that it's really important that we don't say more about what we mean by that. I mean, I slightly disagree and feel like we should probably give some more detail, or maybe misrepresenting them actually there, but it's an ongoing conversation about the degree to which you frame that Citizens Assembly. Like if we say everything should look at, maybe we're influencing it. And the whole point is it's supposed to be an independent body. I don't see how you can look at issues of justice without looking at issues of finance and economics. I just think it's impossible. And same for the planet. You know, if you look at the work of, say, Kate Raworth on donut economics, you have to look at the planet's capacity to provide. So this isn't, so if you're not careful, what you'll get is a whole set of solutions that go, right, okay, we're going to make sure we've got a fleet of electric cars, and we're going to build some nuclear power stations for the energy, and we're going to build these machines that suck carbon out of the atmosphere, and that's how Britain's going to get to its target of 2050, which is a nutty target. All of the above involves a massive rape and exploitation of people and planet to do that on a big scale. We can't live the way we're living now, and we have to sort of face that. And actually, I don't think we're going to get a choice about it, really. I mean, another thing that coronavirus is doing is showing us that we're not the ones in the domination story. What I mean by that is, well, do you know, it's nice to talk to 2 women, right? It's really interesting to see women leaders around the world and how few deaths have been under the leadership of many women. Like last time I looked at New Zealand, there were 21 deaths, over 50,000 in the UK now. take on secondary effects, and I think over 100,000 in the US.
Yeah.
Those that are, and Brazil set to skyrocket if it's not already. I'm guessing it has. Those that are really living in this story that says we dominate, we take what we want because it's all for us as human beings. It's the wrong story. It's not true. It's not going to work for us. It's not the story that many indigenous cultures hold. It's not the story. Humanity's not held that story. I mean, you're historians. When did history start? What's prehistory?
Yeah, exactly.
This is the classicist. So the classicist has got the answers for this.
But I mean, what's called big or deep history is really coming to the fore right now, especially with the climate crisis. History of the Earth, historians are increasingly looking as far back as existence is. So it's not even just about humans anymore. You know, historians are trying to understand the world from where.
I've just read this book called The Story of B. I didn't much enjoy it actually, but I still would recommend it in some ways. I mean, it's making that point about history, like why we spent so much time looking at a really narrow band of history. Why don't we look at the history that went on for like millions of years, where human beings were like not having a problem, didn't seem to be having wars, didn't seem to be having, you know, killing off megafauna and all the rest of it. We seem to have had periods, vast periods, when we were in alignment with nature, the more sort of animistic pathways. And I'm not saying nobody, you know, it's a classic thing to say here, environmentalists, you want us all back in the caves. Of course, it's not that, but there's a like modern version of animism which sees life as being sacred and understands that we are a body in the body of life, you know.
It was when that humans, I think some people have read this, he's an anthropologist, he wrote Sapiens, and he talks about the cognitive revolution, the agricultural revolution, and the industrial revolution. And very much you suddenly see, you know, towns and cities coming together. We settled down. We were no longer for hunter-gatherers and foragers. And you see these systems of elitism kind of spring up. And that's where you start to see kind of elitism and the exploitation of both people and resources.
My understanding is there's this idea that there was agriculture or not agriculture, but I think the thing that he talks about in The Story of B is totalitarian agriculture. I think it's a good phrase. You know, the idea of agriculture that is all consuming, you get as much possible as you can. Yeah. Whereas if you study indigenous communities, they do agriculture. They just don't do the form of agriculture, which is like slash down a forest and burn everything and maximize, you know, grain production to feed to cattle and burgers and all the rest of it, and then move on. I mean, it's not that form of agriculture is the problem, right?
It doesn't seem like, it seems so simple, and yet we just keep plowing on because capitalism forces kind of the model forward that we need to have more and more and more. But that's a completely ideological argument that I will completely leave over there.
No, I think it's a good one. I think it's an important point actually, on it, because capitalism, and you can argue we haven't even got a form of capitalism now, we've got something else, but whatever. But it's the best system for optimizing domination and extraction and exploitation. But it's not like the other ones had it sorted. It's not like you can't look at versions of socialism and communism and go, oh yeah, they were really in alignment with nature. So I'm not personally, I don't personally find blaming capitalism, like it's not the end point of the issue. It's certainly in its rapacity and its ability to exploit, and in neocolonialism it needs opposing and changing. But there's something even deeper in us all at the minute that's in this story of separation. Charles Eisenstein is like my go-to person on this. Have you come across his work?
I haven't.
He's awesome, right? And he's lush. He's really nerdy. He's like my kind of lush nerd. But anyway, he's written this book called The Ascent of Humanity, which is going from prehistory. So you might be, it's a big tome, but like the story of separation, of how humanity came out of this alignment into this disalignment. And like, we're either going to sort it out, or we're going to, you know, what I understanding is like chaotic systems that we're in, they get more and more complex, and they either like fall to pieces or they paradigm shift, they move into a new way, and we're on that cusp. But what an amazing time to be alive if you've got a roof over your head and food still, you know. It's fascinating.
You're very lucky. And I feel like also in this day and age that, you know, it's amazing how far we can get our voices to reach if we shout loud enough. and if we like come together. So that's always like that's really lovely to see.
I mean, the crucial bit of oppression of young people, right, is to make you think that you don't know what's going on, not to trust your intelligence, double down on if you're a woman and if you're working class. Don't trust your thinking, and don't believe in your power. You know, that's the message.
I mean,
yeah,
like,
yeah. And
from day one that when, as a woman, we're not good, we're not good. Yeah, we are not good enough. We're told that like we have to conform to a system that like inherently oppresses us. And it's madness. It's completely wrong. Believe in yourself, believe in your power, push forward, you know? If any
that you're more, it's more important what you look like than what you think is the kind of message to Western women. But even as you responded there, Anna, you're talking about the work you need to do as an individual, which is totally true. Like do that piece. But for any group, actually, it's the togetherness that matters. So like it's been a breakthrough for me as a feminist, the way to sit in ceremony and circle with other women around a fire every month. I mean, obviously not at the minute, but with the full moon as my way, but to kind of share and to heal the sisterhood, because part of what happens between women is, you know, how it shows up, division and bitching and gossiping and
I mean, it starts
rivalry.
like 14 as well. Like it's you know,
horrendous.
We're divided up, you know, we're supposed to look like this, act like that.
Every time women have got each other's backs and have got a connection with each other, it's like a piece of work against the patriarchy, if you see what I mean. But the point I was making more was about young people as well. You know, it's the same for I know obviously there's different genders, but same for the guys as well. You know, it's like it's all about, that's where homophobia is used as a tool to separate men and to control.
Toxic masculinity is a huge problem that like needs to be, you know, sorted and talked about and, you know, brought out into the open. And we really need to educate men and women on how to work together to both bust internalized misogyny and toxic masculinity.
Yeah, and for men to know that, because I often think this is a more controversial thing to say potentially anyway.
Yeah, we love controversy.
Well, so there's a sort of story around sexism and patriarchy that go, women are the ones that are suffering, and like if you look at the stats, women are the ones that are suffering. Except that men die on average, I think it's something like 7 years younger than women. Like the cost to men of the patriarchal system is enormous, and it gets individualized and blamed on individual men when they get things wrong. And I think what a head fuck, like with women and with the class system and things like that, race and so on, if you can figure out that I'm worth something, that's generally the leap. And education really helps with that, right? But that's generally the leap. You don't have to, it's not like a simple thing, but you go, I'm worth something, and you know what your path is. It's like anybody in like let's call it a perpetrator role. It's a sort of not a very nice phrase. Or, you know, like men, you're being told you're better than other people, but you're bad, you're inherently bad. I mean, same to middle class people, you're better than working class people, but there's something bad and wrong about you. I mean, what a way to mess with people's heads. You know, like, what are you supposed to do with that? It's really confusing.
It's good that the third wave of feminism that we're experiencing is acknowledging that every group within society experiences the problems differently, and that they all have kind of different needs. And that kind of leads on to our next question, which is about diversity in the exile movement. So you have been quoted in the New Yorker in July 2019 as saying, as you looked over a protest in London, there are clearly too many white people. There is nothing wrong with being white, but we are missing loads of our people. Now I'm going to do that annoying thing that interviewers do and shoot you 3 questions and then we can go over them again, but they're all kind of I want to kind of say them in succession. So the first one is XR a group that represents a cross-section of society? And then, considering that, what is XR going to do to increase the number of members in less represented groups? For example, how are Indigenous people going to be included in discussions and rallying in the future, considering that sources in XR have said that Indigenous outreach has been a bit more of a challenge? For example, with in March 2020 in Canada, that was said.
Yeah. I think it's the complex topic, right? So the first thing to say is that no, XR is not representative of the UK population. Even I'm more UK focused. I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of other countries. It's not really, it's other people's countries. So the second thing is it's a both and. On the one hand, it's okay for XR not to be everything. it's okay for XR to be what it is, in my opinion, and for us not to use it as a massive stick to beat ourselves up with, which is what the left, progressive left, often does to itself, sort of like some kind of internalized self-hatred. I mean, there are lots of working class people that got XR off the ground, myself included, but there's a place where if we do a piece of the jigsaw puzzle, it's okay. We're in this wider movement of movements. And of course, you would want XR to be as welcoming, as inclusive, as open, as connected to a wider, more diverse range of people. Sometimes diversity it depends what you mean by that as well. You can have like more obvious diversity, like, oh, there's a person who's brown skinned here, or a person who's sitting in a wheelchair or whatever. But quite often there's not that much diversity in terms of political orientation. And so what XR has set its goals around, and why we've not sort of messaged in such a sort of lefty sounding way, is to be more of a broad tent, to be welcoming of people who may be like more like radical anarchists, to people who are like border, conservatives. Somebody was possibly setting up XR conservatives. I don't know who went away or got on with it, but who are concerned about the ecological crisis. So that's been part of the push. We have a group that's less well known about in the UK called the XR Internationalist Solidarity Network, and it's really time to celebrate that piece of work. Right from the first crowdfunder we ever put out, we set aside 20% of the money, and the XR International Solidarity team are in charge of how that's shared, that money, and they have been building networks of frontline of connections to frontline resistance in different parts of the world. And it's led by Global South people. It's led by a brilliant Pan-Africanist called Kofi Maruli-Klou, and supported by Esther Stanford-Jose, who's an expert in reparations. And part of the work that they're doing is opening an office in South London that will connect more deeply with diaspora organisations. We also have work under the umbrella of what we call Movement of Movements, and one of Kofi's points is that it's not always necessary to make everything be, that you have to make this thing work for everybody, that actually it's coming in alongside and learning from other movements that's also important. I think the main other thing to say is that, and it's a big thing to say, it's a big topic, is that there has been I wrote most of the principles and values for XR with my colleague Stu Basden at the time. Other people had inputs, but we did the most of the writing. And the thing that I have the most grief around, I guess, is the lack of clarity of I think it's number 7, mitigating for power. And it's really about talking about privilege rather than power. We've been really unclear as a movement about what we think about power, leadership, leaderfulness, and what my colleague Skeena Rathore would call co-liberation. We a little bit touched on it, talking about patriarchy and how that affects men and as well as women, and what we can do, all of us, with those wounds and so on. There tends to be really deep systemic analysis of how this stuff operates. You talk about third wave feminist, but there tends less to be in social movements systemic solutions, and it tends to quite quickly go into, see Gail, you just did that thing that white people did, or see that man's being really patriarchal or whatever. Like, if we really hold this idea that we're all sitting in a deeply wounded, fucked up society, like, how do we hold each other and move forwards together from that in a way that's healing, but also doesn't expect us all to be healed in order to change the systems that we're in? And so that requires making lots of agreements about how we want to work together. And I think there's a lot of work that XR needs to do on that, and has been trying to do since its inception. It's not easy stuff.
Yeah,
It's left behind.
Around these kinds of areas, you do talk about recognising the interplay of different hierarchies. And on that topic, considering what Honor mentioned earlier, the George Floyd murder. So I wanted to ask you about considering that the aim of XR is to create civil disobedience, which often does end in arrests. How does XR, and how do they plan to protect more vulnerable members of your group, like BAME XR members when it is known that they suffer worse from police brutality?
Yeah. Again, it's a sort of both and conversation. The racially marginalised people have got a really incredible and beautiful history of people putting themselves forwards in risky situations. I mean, the more obviously known people like Nelson Mandela or Malcolm X or Rosa Parks or Gandhi. There's a history of civil disobedience, and sometimes, and again, Kofi's written about this. There can be a sense of not fully honouring that history if we talk about racially marginalised people in a way that is only really speaking to sort of victimhood or a need to protect. So that's one piece, and the one I'm saying out in opposition, they're both true, right? And of course, the experience of being arrested or of putting yourselves at risk in that way is not necessarily going to be the same for different communities. That it's well-known fact that there is institutionalized racism in the police force, and yeah, the recent murder is, I was just sharing about that yesterday. Actually, it's just like testimony to that situation, to that reality.
Yeah.
Nobody in XR is in any way asking or insisting that anybody gets arrested. What we say is it takes between 10 and 20 people to support anybody who chooses to get arrested. So you may have a caring responsibility, you may have mental health issues. There's lots of reasons why arrest might not be the thing for you, and but it's not. There isn't one story here, and there certainly have been Black people who got arrested in XR. I think there's a lot of intersectionality with class here, where it went okay for them. That's what I was going to say, but likely that there was a lot of. It's being held in a context where it's very visible. It's not about police hassling Black kids with hoodies on, that type of, we're not in that situation with XR. It's out on the street. So I think we have, and we do take care of people around the legal side of things as best we can. I mean, I guess there's always improvements could be made, but yeah.
Thank you. That was insightful, obviously, in light of things at the moment. We've got 15 minutes left, so we've got a couple of final questions that we wanted to ask you. This is one of our questions. So this is kind of leading back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. But do you think that being a woman makes a difference to your role as an activist? And what are those benefits that come with that? And what are the disadvantages? Obviously, you were talking about the New Zealand Prime Minister very recently, and what would, she's obviously a figurehead, and so is Greta Thunberg, and there are so many more that I can think of, but won't list out. And what would your advice be to young women out there who want to make a difference in the world, as a woman yourself, and as you work with so many amazing women as well, some that you've mentioned today?
Yeah. God, I think I said something about it, which is, I think when you work out what your piece of tackling internalized depression, that's the language I would use, is how does it sit on you? Is it about the place where you get caught in self-hatred, or is it about the place where you don't take yourself seriously, or whatever? I mean, you usually got a version of self-worth in it. I mean, like, in some ways there's a gift in that, because I think it brings, at least for myself, it brings a lot of compassion, and I would hope humility for understanding that people struggle, that and a lot of the ways in which I guess I lead is trying to hold differences and hold energies and hold people together, because I thoroughly believe that's how we make the change, is by moving forwards together. Yeah.
Do you have any advantages as a woman, though? Do you think, some of the things that you as you only as a woman can bring to
I think that's what I'm saying is the experience of sexism, if you can get over it,
yeah,
is like, you know what they say, what doesn't kill you can only make you stronger.
yes,
I feel, you know, I really another piece, and I could give lots of advice, and I'm not sure if it's all useful anyway, but one thing I would say is our moon cycles as women, women with wounds, at least with wombs, is a real gift. It's got wisdom, it's got deep wisdom in it. It doesn't make things up. I mean, obviously if you're choosing to be on the contraceptive pill or a coil that's got hormones in, you won't be experiencing that, and that's a sort of choice. But if you want to look up the moon inside you and things like that, there's some real wisdom out there. I'm struggling to remember a particular woman's name. It's annoying, but anyway, who focused on this. Each stage of your cycle, there'll be, I mean, I have at least 8 different personalities. You'll get in, actually, I'm just on my second or third day of bleed, and I get really horny and excited, and sort of, I've gone through the tired bit and the anxiety bit. But and like 8 days before, I have what I call angry day, but it doesn't make things up. Like I was like, I'm not taking this shit anymore. And that was like quite nice to people. I don't know, and then at other times I just want to shag everybody. I mean, you know, it just changed.
I feel that, like, some days you just ring up and you're just like, dude, come over, or girl, come over. Like, I need it now. Let's move. The other thing, this is again
so much creativity in it. I mean, what the womb wisdom says is just be mindful of your summertime, not setting up your winter for a bad time. So you can, in your summertime, like when you're in your, you know, coming towards ovulation, you're like really energetic, you can do anything, you're like, you know, I think in some countries they let women are allowed days off when they're bleeding because they know that they're just so much more productive at this time. Just don't over commit in that period when then the winter comes around, you're like, fuck, what did I do, what did I agree to, what have I taken on, you know, you maybe recognize that. So get to know your own cycle, and there's it's great to sit with other women, and I include trans women in that as well.
Yeah. Can I ask one question then? So if you're on, what contraceptive would you recommend then? Because obviously the pill, and I know this is such a rogue question, but I really want to ask it now. If it's not the pill and the coil, then what? Obviously there's the obvious condom, but like, what would you recommend?
I mean, I've got a copper coil myself, so you know, it's just not my patch. God, I really need to remember this woman's name. Maybe it'll come to me and I'll email you and you can put it in the channel.
I'll put it in the link.
Stuff. I think there's a lot of encouragement for, if women have regular cycles, to use one of those apps to sort of track it, and then you can use different contraception at different times of the month, can't you? Like if you want to be really, I just, for myself personally, if I'm really honest, like that idea that when I'm my most randy, I'm going to get a condom out with my boyfriend, like that's why I got a coil fitted, because I don't actually trust my own ability to take care of that in that moment. If I, you know, I mean, I know that's not cool, but
oh no, we've all been there. I mean,
you know what I'm saying, sisters.
Like, we've all been in that situation where you're like, damn it, I don't have one. Oh well. But yeah, is it okay if we ask one more question? We've reached out to every single university media outlet that we could find on the internet, and we got a couple of people replying back to us. And one guy from Cambridge has sent in like a very interesting question. So would you be happy?
Yeah, let's have a go, you know, yeah.
Thank you. This is a great question. I really like this. I'm gonna remember.
It's gonna be really hard, isn't it?
Yeah. There's so many great questions. His name is Giorgio, and I'm going to butcher this, Constandi, and he writes, in your 2019 interview with Dr. Gabriel Walker, you made the remark that fascism and war are both signs of social collapse. Do you believe that the rise of populism across the world is linked to people's fear that resources are running out? If so, how do we convince the masses to channel their fear into movements like XR instead of populist leaders?
Well, again, thank you. What was he called? Giorgio
Constandi.
Thank you, Giorgio. Yes, I think fascism is I wouldn't even say it's a risk. I would say it's here in disguise. You know, I mean, people sometimes think fascism's going to come with funny hand signals and costumes and that, unless you're a fetishist. I think it does, you know. But it's already here. That and I think Ian Hanning-Lopez's work is really worth checking out. Ian has, and we've got some interviews with him recently, they're online, others online, Ian Hanning-Lopez. He talks about the way in which we're divided from each other. And, you know, he wrote a book called Dog Whistle Politics. So it's the idea that instead of being blatantly racist or misogynist, you say something that everyone knows what you mean, but you haven't said it so you can get away with it, right? So you can talk about... Microaggression. Well, no, it's more, it's dog whistling is like if you talk about welfare queens or drug dealers,
yeah,
everybody's thinking about black people. It's more of an American thing. But... Or if you talk about benefit cheats in this country, you're talking about the more poor and marginalised people, right? So the dog whistles to make you despise people of certain class or racially marginalised people or whatever. And they work on everybody. He's got evidence show this works, even on, you know, in amongst racially marginalised people, you have colorism and different shades of pigment have different meaning. I mean, this is the nature of how fucked up humanity is. Anyway, but the point that the really good news off the back of all of that is that in those places that are the most susceptible to those messages, like you know, the sort of kind of redneck parts of I don't know if that's an offensive thing to say, so apologies if it is, but redneck. In America we kind of know what we mean, or gammons in the UK or whatever we call folks that have been played by that stuff. When you talk to people about we are being actively divided so that people can rip us off, we're being played, that message lands more strongly than the dog whistling. So it's really important that in our social movements we have to tend to the issues of solidarity and the deep wounds and the, you know, talked a little bit about them. In our messaging, we need to speak to the divisions, to the you know, classic attempts to divide and conquer. People need to acknowledge that they're being played. They know that something's being played, but if you don't give them the reason, and it's I mean, I've only just had this thought. It's still even there a thing that you have to take care of, because I don't believe in pointing. I mean, you'll hear me doing it myself, so hands in the air. I don't really believe in blaming anybody, because it's a route to division, and it's a route to individualizing or pointing to a certain community. When it becomes strong that people point to, in quotes, the elites, there's a diversion that happens that then says, okay, but it's the Jews. So that's the role of anti-Semitism, and that's the great risk. And I must actually thinking about it, ask Ian about anti-Semitism within his thinking off the back of that, because there is a division that happens by those that want to that are benefiting most from the system, but we don't want that message to get captured to an anti-Semitic message. So it's big stuff, right? More than anything, if every place we can build togetherness is building our resilience.
Excellent takeaway. Just we need to build togetherness, and we need to push. You know, we need to push for our to save ourselves. Well, thank you so much. We've loved this. It's been so kind of educational, and we've been so psyched for this for so long. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's been really fun. Yeah, it's been really fun. And lots of love to you both. And know your power, lasses, you know, go for it.
Yeah. We both very regularly make the statements that we know our power, and we're going to continue to, you know, raise women up, and, you know, raise each other up, and raise men up too. And, you know, we hope to continue. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really enjoyed having you.
Everyone, this has been Dr. Gail Bradbrook on the Espresso Series. Thank you so much. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.